Trialist Andrew Mlangeni turned 94 today. Mlangeni was arrested at Lilliesleaf Farm in Rivonia in 1963. He went on trial with Nelson Mandela and other struggle veterans. Tonight, the former President Kgalema Motlanthe, he's giving the inaugural Andrew Mlangeni Integrity Lecture in Sandton. Let's go there now and watch some of his speech tonight.
Biography, as it were. Mine is to just indicate the milestones of Comrade Andrew Mlangeni's life. And of course, his elder brothers came to Johannesburg. One of them, his name was Nyoko, had a home in Orlando East, and Andrew ended up staying with him in Orlando East. And then, of course, by then he had completed his lower primary education. Having passed standard 6, he was able to enroll at St. Peter's in 1944. Now, St. Peter's was the first secondary school for blacks in the Transvaal. It was established in 1930. And up until then, there was no secondary school in the Transvaal. The Transvaal, those of you who are too young, was a province made up of today's Gauteng, Northwest, Limpopo, Mpumalanga. And this St. Peter's was a fountainhead of producing most of our leaders and people who later in life impacted very positively on society. The roll call of the alumni of St. Peter's really reads like a who's who of South African political landscape. This is where leaders such as Oliver Tambo matriculated. Oliver Tambo did his matric at St. Peter's. It was down here in the southern suburbs of Johannesburg, in Rosettenville. So Oliver Tambo matriculated from St. Peter's. And at that time, when he matriculated, he topped all the learners, black and white, in South Africa in mathematics. And two white parents could not believe that a black child could attain that kind of results. And so they challenged the results and complained and actually said his papers should be remarked. And they were remarked, and he still, of course, came up tops. He went to Fort Hare, studied, and came back to St. Peter's to teach. And so some of the key leaders, like people like Henry Squire Makoti, Dumanokwe, Joe Matthews, and many others, Rusa Badenbele, were students of Oliver Tambo at St. Peter's. And later, people like Comrade Andrew Mlangeni did their secondary education at St. Peter's as well. And many others followed, such as Hugh Masekela. Hugh Masekela was given a trumpet, his first trumpet, by one of the staff members and principal of the school, Father Trevor Huddleston, who later became Bishop Huddleston, who was one of the 3 first people to be decorated with the ANC's highest award, isithwalande swaparangwe. Because Trevor Huddleston was not your Bible-thumping priest. He was an activist. And so at the Congress of the People, 3 leaders were honored as the isithwalande swaparangwe. One of them was Trevor Huddleston. The other was Chief Albert Lituli, was under restriction orders and therefore could not attend, and the other was Dr. Yusuf Dadu, who also could not attend the Congress of the People. So this college, I'm spending a bit of time to tell you about St. Peter's because it basically imbued in its students respect for themselves and respect for the African people. And that is why so many leaders came out of St. Peter's College. Of course, even Lucas Mangope, the late Lucas Mangope, comes from St. Peter's College. But of course, he rather followed a different path. So the political awareness and consciousness was imbibed from St. Peter's College. And when Andrew completed his junior certificate and due to financial constraints could not continue with his schooling and took up an employment. At some point he was a bus driver and so on. But by 1951 he joined the ANC Youth League, as well as by 54 the mother body, the African National Congress. And after the establishment of the South African Communist Party in 1953, he also joined the Young Communist League and worked very closely with Ruth First. And was there at the Congress of the People in 1955, very active. He ended up serving as the secretary of the ANC in the southwestern areas. He came from and still belongs to the ANC branch in Dube village. Dube is the only township that is referred to as a village. But that's where Omendru's home was established, having moved from Orlando East and settled in Dube. At that branch in Dube, he had a colleague, a fellow branch member, called Patrick Mtembu, Giraffe, that's what they used to call him. And it is interesting and very, very important to remember that after the banning of the ANC, when a decision was then taken to embark on armed struggle, and Comrade Nelson Mandela was given the green light to establish Umkhonto Wesizwe as an independent organization from the ANC, because the leadership then felt that such an organization which embarks on armed struggle should not be associated with the ANC. Otherwise, it would have implicated ordinary ANC members who had not, at that point, accepted that the non-violent forms of struggle were no longer as effective as they were in the past. And I'm saying it is interesting because the Communist Party, the South African Communist Party, had already taken a decision to establish specialized units of people who were going to embark on sabotage activities. And when Nelson Mandela on the ANC side was also given the green light to establish an organization, Umkhonto weSizwe, the units of the South African Communist Party were then, brought together. And how the way it happened was that the Communist Party decided that Joe Slovo would be the link between the South African Communist Party and Umkhonto weSizwe, and therefore should work very closely with Nelson Mandela. And on the ANC side, Walter Sisulu was also given the same responsibility to be the main link between Umkhonto weSizwe and the ANC leadership. And so, following the banning of the ANC, remember the Congress alliance was made up of 5 component organizations: the African National Congress, the South African Indian Congress, the Congress of Democrats, the South African People's Organization, and later it was called the South African Congress of Colored People's Congress, and then the South African Congress of Trade Unions, SACTU. So there were 5 component organizations. But of these 5, only the African National Congress was banned in 1960. The others remain as legal organizations, even though their leaders were persecuted and placed under very strict restrictions. So, Umkhonto weSizwe, when Nelson Mandela was given the green light and he was now to recruit, his first recruit for Umkhonto weSizwe was Comrade Andrew Mlangeni. And so, I'm saying this is a very interesting bit of history, because in the South African Communist Party, Comrade Andrew Mlangeni was among the first 6 that were selected to go abroad for training. So he was together with Comrade Raymond Mhlaba, together with Comrade Wilton Mkwai, and the late Comrade Joe Kabi, Stephen Naidu, as well as his fellow branch member, Patrick Giraffe Mthembu. And the 6 of them, when they were sent to different parts of China to train, they met Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao of the Communist Party of China at the time. And they were sent to different places for training in various guerrilla warfare skills. When they came back from their training in Tanzania, they met Comrade Oliver Tambo, who had now been tasked to go and establish the external mission in Tanzania. And one of the points that Comrade Andrew remembers very fondly is how Oliver Tambo, who was the leader, chose to sleep on the floor and allow them to sleep on the bed, even though he was a leader. So there are lessons for us here about integrity, about humility, and also being of service to others. And of course, we know that after their return from training, by that time, the leadership of the ANC, because it was now a banned organization, and the South African Communist Party had regrouped in 1953, that is 7 years earlier, because the Communist Party of South Africa disbanded itself in 1950 in anticipation that the nationalist government, which had passed a piece of legislation called Suppression of Communism Act, was definitely going to come for the Communist Party. So they said, well, they must not find us sitting as sitting ducks. So we're closing shop, and so that they must not impound our assets, and they must not be in a position to take our membership and charge this membership. And Rusty Bernstein writes in his book that the Communist Party then held a Central Committee meeting, and at that meeting they thought there was going to be discussion about how to go underground and all kinds of sophisticated theories. And he says Moses Kotane kept the meeting very short. Moses Kotane was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of South Africa. And so Moses Kotane said to them, from today we are disbanding, so there's no more any Communist Party, and none of you is a member of the Communist Party. Thank you very much. Meeting closed. And so Rusty Bernstein says, as they were walking out of the meeting, they kept on asking themselves that, well, I'm sure there's a fallback position. The leadership has a plan B, and there was no plan B. There was no plan B. The party had closed, and that was it. And then, of course, some members of the party who were not happy with this decision decided that they would form a faction and continue, because they were worried that if you go underground, you are not known by anybody, because there are no people underground. So they called themselves Bafabegia. Bafabegia, this grouping called itself Bafabegia, meaning they will die dancing in their boots. They regarded this tactical retreat by the Communist Party of South Africa as cowardice. And Bafabegia, they were known to wear red ties. They were identifiable by their red ties, and their slogan was, the rule of the road is always to keep left. Wherever you are, keep left. So if you're sitting to the right, you wouldn't qualify to be a member of Bafabegia. The rule of the road was always to keep left. And of course, they caused a bit of organizational problems because they were a faction. Eventually, a commission had to be established, a board or a committee, to investigate their activities, and some of them went into exile, and that was the end of them. So it took the Communist Party of South Africa 3 years, because at that point they could then identify the disciplined people who would survive underground conditions. And by 1960, they had accumulated 7 years of functioning underground accumulated that kind of experience. And so when the ANC got banned, and as Madiba said, that there comes a time in the life of every nation to either to choose whether, to submit or to continue fighting. And as they were grappling with this question of how to continue the struggle, of course they benefited from the experience of their comrades who were members of the Communist Party. Therein lies the bond between the Communist Party and the African National Congress. But because the Communist Party had experience and had been operating in that way for a while, they understood that it would no longer be possible to continue as of old, and so holding meetings and so on. And they sought places of safety where they could meet without attracting attention of the special branch or the security police. And one of those places was Lilliesleaf down here in Rivonia. Those of you who have never visited Lilliesleaf, please do yourself a great favor and take a tour of Lilliesleaf. So the Central Committee of the Communist Party acquired the farm as a safe place so that they could meet there. But then because of this close working relationship, when Nelson Mandela was underground, being abroad without valid passport, and the security police were on his trail, he spent time at Lilliesleaf. And whilst he was there, he had borrowed some books, to read about guerrilla warfare and so on. And not just to read, but to study, because he was aware that they were now entering a period where such skills would be direly needed. So he made copious notes as he was studying there, on guerrilla warfare and how to be a good communist and so on, and left his notes there at Lilliesleaf. So when he was arrested at Howick in 1962 and charged and convicted, sentenced to 5 years, his notes were left at Lilliesleaf. But he had an opportunity to say to his lawyers that they should go to Lilliesleaf, find the notes and destroy them. He did ask his lawyers, Joe Slovo, to do that. But anybody who has a sense of history would rarely ever destroy notes. If a person destroys notes, you know that they have no sense of history. So those who found the notes then said to Arthur Goldreich, who was asked to move into the main house with his family so that the whole farm could look like a properly running farm, decided to hide the notes, Mandela's handwritten note, in the coal bunker at the back of the house. It's still, all of this is still there. So if you go a tour of Lilliesleaf, you will find all of this. And so Mandela was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. He was serving his 5 years from 1962. Meanwhile, the high command, the leadership of the ANC, having decided that they are going to continue the struggle underground, and they were operating from Lilliesleaf. At some point, they decided that Lilliesleaf was no longer safe. It was no longer a safe place because of the movement. There were too many people who were visiting the farm, and but they were engaged in a debate and a discussion on a document that prepared called Operation Maibuye, which was a plan on how they were going to recruit thousands of young people.
Well, that's the former President Kgalema Motlanthe. He's giving that address in honour of Andrew Mlangeni, of course, one of the last surviving Rivonia trials.